The Florida Gators, 8-2 in the 10-game SEC schedule. They take a loss in the SEC championship game to Alabama. Close loss on the final score. As we've discussed several times, it did feel like one of those games where Alabama established the lead and then just sort of kept them at arm's length. But still, you look up, Florida had a chance there at the end. Then the Gators would go on to lose with a whole lot of opt-outs in their bowl game. The offseason since the conclusion had initial positivity. DeMarcus Bowman, former 5-star running back from Clemson, announced he's going to transfer to Florida. Eric Gilbert, former 5-star tight end at LSU, says he's going to transfer to Florida. But Gilbert's not going to be at Florida. So we've got a lot of pieces to fill in. As we talked about when we discussed Gilbert, you're already losing Kadarius Toney and Trevon Grimes in addition to Kyle Pitts. And while you've got some names behind them with Jacob Copeland, Justin Shorter, Xavier Henderson, sort of the Kemore Gamble and Keon Zipperer at tight end, expecting somebody to step up right there. This, to me, offensively is all about the Emory Jones show. What does the offense look like with him? Not as a featured piece, but as the full-time starter. Defensively, it's a kind of a gut check season for Todd Grantham for this defensive front. You could run on the Gators last year, and that became really problematic. And just the images of Dan Mullen fuming at Todd Grantham on the sidelines, you know, from the transition at quarterback to the defensive side of the ball, Gator Dan, where are you looking at here for the Gators in terms of the things you want to learn this spring?
The development of Emory Jones, like how different is this offense going to look? It is a position, though, that you trust Dan Mullen with, because I think he's, you know, sometimes we use that term, you know, quarterback guru or quarterback whisperer, and it's a little bit overrated. And some guys ride that reputation without having a full body of work about it. But one thing Dan Mullen has proven over the course of time is he will play to his quarterback's strengths, which I think is really an important role for him to play as coach when he works around Emory Jones. But that being said, like I know Emory Jones is athletic. I know he's going to be more of a run threat, but Kyle Trask threw for 4,200 yards and 43 touchdowns. That is a ton of offensive production. Now, I don't think Emory Jones is going to do that, nor I think that should be the expectation, but they were a really, really good offense. How does it look? Can they capture those types of numbers? And sure, I think their defense will look better. There's no way they can be as bad as they were against the rush last year, where they gave up 170 yards a game on the ground. So I think there'll be a little bit room for growth as like Emory Jones is kind of adapting. The team will be able to, the defense should be better. But I think overall, like this is really a fascinating year for Dan Mullen, because I feel like it's almost going to be right back in the SEC East championship game, and they beat Georgia again. And even though Georgia's the favorite, or it's going to be another 8-4 type season, which I feel after this year, I know there were less games, but I feel like it would be a massive letdown. And there might be some just kind of irritated Gator fans if they're not right back there then again this year.
I think they'll be pretty good. Here's the thing, right? Dan Mullen, as Danny mentioned, is a really good developer of quarterbacks, but he also has a really big history of working specifically with running quarterbacks. In fact, last year's offense was a stark departure from anything that he's done before. Even if you look at Dak Prescott's progression there at Mississippi State, he started off as a guy that they used very Tim Tebow-like. And then slowly over the years, his progression as a passer occurred. And you know, to his and Mullen's credit, you know, he got drafted, and now he's starting for the Cowboys, and it just got
very
paid.
Wealthy.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, we've seen how they sort of want to use Emory Jones. I know that some Florida fans are a little bit disappointed that they are not going to have this wide open passing offense quite as much this year. But if there's a guy who I'm like, man, I really wish I could find the coach and offensive coordinator who's good with mobile quarterbacks and making the defense defend all 11 in the run game, it's Dan Mullen, right? I have basically no concerns about that. And Dan Mullen will find a way to score points. He pretty much always does, regardless, especially when he has some decent level of players. I've been hearing some good things from the Swamp 24/7 podcast with Thomas and Blake about Xavier Henderson, who obviously is a big time receiver prospect that they signed. He's a guy with really, really nice speed. Maybe he can step up there opposite Jacob Copeland. I really don't have any concerns about them offensively as far as still being good. I don't know if they won't be as good as they were this year, but this is kind of a special year. And I think defensively they could take a jump. That's going to be a nasty defensive line. I don't think there's many teams in the league that can block them. And I think their linebackers will be better. And like the secondary, I think should be better. They're going to play more man coverage this year. Apparently they had too many guys confused last year. So some new coaches, and that's kind of what I got on the Gators.
Oh, that's on there. Before you weigh in there, Tom, that is one of my favorite spring practice adages. We're simplifying everything, boys. That's the number one way to get the fans off your back. It's like, we're going to be simple. We're going to let them play aggressive and just let them go out there and be athletes.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting situation, and I agree with Danny and Bud for pretty much everything that you've said. Where I think the SEC East as a whole, and we're going to get into it in the rest of the show, is really interesting in 2021 because, as we've talked about on prior shows, with like the free year of eligibility with so many schools in it for every player, we're seeing a ton of returning production come back across the country. But if you look at the SEC East as a whole and the returning production in Bill Connolly's rankings, this is a division where pretty much the entire division is on the very low end of returning production. Missouri is ranked the highest in returning production, and they're 56th. Everybody else is in like the 70s, 90s, or the 100s. Florida's 108th. It's 125th on offense. And I think that kind of what Danny was talking about, the most interesting thing for me with Florida is they lose all that production, and it's not just finding the guys that are going to come in, but it's going to be the style of play. Because as Bud said, last year was kind of the outlier for what Dan Mullen offenses do. We typically do not see that kind of, it was practically an air raid offense for the most part. Like they barely ran the ball. When they did run the ball, they weren't very good at it. And Danny, you mentioned the amount of passes that Kyle Trask threw last year, and the replacing with Emory Jones, a kid who in 24 games as a collegiate college football quarterback has thrown 86 passes total. So clearly things are going to look a lot different, but this is still a really talented team. And while there's not a ton of production coming back, most of the production that is returning is on the defensive side of the ball. And this was a Florida defense that last year I thought was pretty bad at the beginning of the season and got better as the year went along, although it never approached anything that I considered to be exceptionally good. But I think that that's going to continue. That growth will continue going into 2021, where they're going to be better on that side of the ball. They're going to look different on the offensive side of the ball. And this is a team with a high floor. What concerns me, though, look at that schedule. Like, yeah, you've got to play Georgia because you always have to play Georgia. But from the West, you got your typical, your annual game with LSU, which is in Baton Rouge this year. But you also get Alabama, third game of the season. You're playing the Tide. So you look at that. Those are three very possible losses: Alabama, at LSU, and Georgia. Then you toss in your, rivalry game with Florida State. You get Mizzou on the road. That could be a tough game this year. This is the kind of situation where, like you were saying, Danny, I could see Florida being like a very good 8-4 team again.
Yeah, I think that's fair, right? If Florida fans have a complaint, it's like they're not recruiting on that Georgia-Bama level. But I don't think any Florida fans think that the bottom's going to fall out of this thing. Dan Mullen's a very good game day coach. I think he's a pretty good manager of the program. I mean, I guess a decent question is like, what do they need to do to just take that next step, whether it occurs this year or next year? Is Danny frozen, by the way, or is he meditating? I think he might.
Danny is frozen. Bye,
Okay.
Danny. There he is.
I'm here.
Like I think their interior offensive line will be pretty good. Tackle still has some question marks. They need to do a little bit better job of recruiting and developing the tackle position. But basically, everybody wants tackles, and God just doesn't make that many guys that big who can move. So welcome to the club.
Can you take us through the defensive line? You mentioned that you like that defensive line, and
I do.
I'll be honest that I'm not feeling that. And I would love to hear a little bit more about some of those, because I'm sure it's names that have been coming up and they've been working on developing to be able to get them to play at a high level. Cause I did not think the defense as a whole played at a very high level last year.
I thought the D-line kind of sucked last year. And I think it's going to be much better this year for this reason. And we talked about this on the RIP Barton and Bud podcast. So Kyrie Campbell was out for a lot of the year for Florida, and they were having to play some dudes out of position because they were pretty thin there. They've done a poor job of recruiting the defensive tackle position in the first two cycles that Mullen was there, which isn't much of a surprise because it's hard to establish those relationships, right? So with Kyrie Campbell out, he was a big part of that defense. He probably get drafted this year. He declared for the draft. They had to play Zach Carter, who's their starting strong side end there on the inside, and he just really didn't have the bulk to hold up. And then at the other spot, they had Tadarius Slayton, who was often not in great shape, and then they also had Javon Dexter, who we had as a 5-star on 24/7 Sports, so I think will be one of the best defensive linemen in the entire country this year, assuming he takes another step, which I anticipate he will do. But I think the key thing this year is they went out and they went to Auburn, and they got Daquan Newkirk, who's already kind of getting some good press and practice. They got Antonio Shelton out of Penn State, who could be a decent nose guard for them. Dexter takes another step. They have better depth at that position this year, but it allows guys like Brenton Cox, who's coming back, to play more of his natural position. He doesn't have to play that strong side spot at all because Carter is not having to kick inside. And that allows Carter to kick back outside, to his normal strong side position. I just think, everybody slides back to their regular position. They got a little bit better depth, and some of the young studs they did recruit last year should be even better this year. So I think they're going to take a big step there.
Good to know. Javon Dexter.
Can I just say two quick things?
Yeah.
One, I don't think anyone in their right mind is going to pick any team other than Florida, Georgia. The East looks the SEC East has been wide open for a while, and it was bad behind Georgia. Now at least there's two teams, but below those two, it doesn't. Talking about the schedule, like you should chalk up wins versus everybody else in the East if you're Florida. The other thing is, I think that, Nick Fitzgerald, I was looking back at his stats. I think this offense might look more similar to that, where he had 2 seasons in his 4-year starting. He rushed for over 1,000 yards, 15 touchdowns, a little bit, more of a balanced run and pass. You can get that offense production. But my question is, what if Emory Jones stumbles? Like, what if he's not a great quarterback or a good quarterback? Like, is there... Does that concern anybody? Because like Tom was saying, we sure haven't seen enough of him. He had opportunities to play a lot, even last year when Kyle Trask was kind of, okay, not great. This year, no problem sitting on the bench. But Emory Jones had opportunities to take that job for him and never did. I just that's the other kind of unknown scenario where, he's highly recruited. He's shown flashes. Everyone likes him. But when he's the guy for 12 games, what if it's not great? Like, then what?
They have a guy.
I don't even know their situation behind him. It doesn't look great though.
So they have a guy they signed who was pretty highly recruited in Anthony Richardson. He's actually from Gainesville. They are built kind of similar, Jones and Richardson, but Jones is more athletic. Richardson is a little bit more sturdy. I would say he's like a pocket guy who has more mobility than Kyle Trask did. But it wouldn't totally shock me if they have a quarterback controversy at some point this year, because Richardson got a lot better junior or senior year, and I think the guy can play. So given Mullen's ability to coach quarterbacks, I'm just very confident at least one of those two dudes will emerge.
Just a really good small forward for Florida State, just, getting out there. Pride of Leesville Road High School. Shout out to Anthony Richardson.